The rain fell in sheets on the day they buried Daniel Sullivan, droplets drumming against black umbrellas like impatient fingers. Eleanor Sullivan stood motionless before the descending casket, her face a pale oval beneath the funeral canopy. 27 years of marriage dissolved into a mahogany box and a mound of sodden earth. The mourners had formed a somber semicircle, neighbors, fellow craftsmen, friends who had known Daniel's steady hands and quiet smile. Eleanor sensed rather than saw two men in expensive raincoats standing apart from the crowd, heads bent in hushed conversation. The older man, silver-haired, with a developer's confident posture, leaned toward his associate. His whisper carried on the damp air. "What a shame about that riverfront property. Finally, we can probably get it for pennies on the dollar once the widow realizes she can't manage alone." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her small black purse. The minister's final words dissolved into the persistent patter of rain. Then came the procession of sympathetic touches, hands on her shoulder, murmured condolences, promises to check in that would largely go unfulfilled. She nodded mechanically, a porcelain figurine programmed for grief's social requirements. The drive home twisted through Millfield's familiar streets, past the hardware store where Daniel had spent Saturday mornings discussing grain patterns and joint techniques with anyone who would listen, past the elementary school where they'd once hoped their children would play. The Sullivan house appeared around the final bend, a two-story craftsman with a steep roof and deep porch, every board and beam touched by Daniel's hands over 3 decades of patient restoration. Eleanor paused at the front door, key suspended before the lock. For the first time in 27 years, no one waited on the other side. No Daniel in his workshop apron, no scent of cedar shavings clinging to his flannel shirts, no gentle voice asking about her day at the library. She pushed inside, leaving wet footprints on the polished hardwood he had restored plank by plank during their first year of marriage. The house creaked its familiar symphony, the loose floorboard near the kitchen threshold, the subtle groan of century-old timber adjusting to the weather. Only now, without Daniel's presence to absorb them, the sounds seemed to reverberate through empty space. Eleanor moved like a visitor through the front hallway, past Daniel's leather work coat still hanging on its peg, carrying the faint scent of sawdust and sandalwood aftershave. In the kitchen, bills and letters had accumulated in her 3-day absence. Sympathy cards, a church bulletin, and beneath them, an envelope bearing the bank's insignia. Eleanor slipped a finger beneath the seal, withdrawing a formal notice printed on heavyweight paper. "Final warning, foreclosure proceedings." The words swam before her eyes. Mortgage payments 4 months overdue, total amount $75,000, property seizure within 90 days. She sank onto a kitchen chair, rain from her funeral clothes seeping into the cushion. Daniel had handled their finances throughout their marriage, always assuring her everything was fine, that his commission-based carpentry work brought in enough despite its seasonal fluctuations. The balance sheet attached to the notice told a different story. A second mortgage taken out 2 years ago, missed payments accumulating like a cancer. Cancer. The word flashed through Eleanor's mind with sudden clarity. 2 years ago, precisely when she had undergone treatment for breast cancer. The expensive specialist Daniel had insisted upon, the private room he'd arranged, the medication not covered by insurance. He had smiled and told her not to worry about the cost. Now she understood the weight behind his reassurances. The doorbell's chime cut through her thoughts. Through the rain-blurred sidelight, Eleanor could make out William Sullivan's broad-shouldered silhouette beneath a black umbrella. Daniel's younger brother by 5 years, with the same chestnut hair, but none of the warmth in his eyes. She hesitated, then smoothed her funeral dress and opened the door. William entered with businessman efficiency, shaking his umbrella onto the porch before stepping inside. His Italian leather shoes gleamed despite the weather, his tailored suit a reminder of the different paths the Sullivan brothers had chosen, Daniel with his hands in wood, William with his fingers on investment portfolios. Behind him stood Patricia, his wife of 15 years, her sympathy smile not quite reaching her appraising eyes as they swept over the home's craftsmanship. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor. Such a terrible loss." William's hand briefly touched her shoulder, the gesture practiced rather than felt. "But I'm here to help. We need to discuss practical matters." Eleanor led them to the living room, where the stone fireplace Daniel had rebuilt stone by stone dominated the far wall. William declined coffee, diving straight into the reason for his visit. He had spoken with his financial advisor. Given her situation, but newly widowed, no children, limited income from the library, the most sensible option would be selling the house. A widow alone can't possibly manage a property this size. William's voice carried the confident resonance of a man accustomed to having his business suggestions accepted without question. I've taken the liberty of having it appraised. I can offer you $180,000, enough to settle any outstanding debts and put a down payment on something more manageable. Perhaps a condo near Patricia and me in Oakwood Hills. Patricia nodded encouragingly. You'd be so much closer to proper amenities, Eleanor. And the burden of maintaining all this? She gestured vaguely at the hand-carved moldings, the built-in bookcases, each a testament to Daniel's patient craftsmanship. Eleanor's throat tightened. The foreclosure notice burned in her pocket like a feather of shame, but something in William's too eager assistance scraped against her grief. The appraisal must have happened while Daniel was still alive, while he was declining in the hospital those final weeks. William had been planning this before his brother was even in the ground. I need time to think. Her voice emerged smaller than intended. William exchanged glances with Patricia. Of course. Just don't wait too long. Properties like this can become financial sinkholes for the unprepared. He left his business card on the coffee table, weighted by a small wooden box Daniel had carved for their 20th anniversary. After they departed, Eleanor climbed the stairs to the second floor, past photographs chronicling her life with Daniel, their wedding day, hiking in the Adirondacks, Daniel receiving a craftsmanship award from the State Woodworkers Guild. At the end of the upstairs hallway stood a narrow door with a small brass handle worn smooth from years of Daniel's touch. The attic door, always locked during their marriage, with Daniel insisting it was merely storage space for his tools and materials, nothing worth seeing. Eleanor paused before it, hand hovering near the tarnished handle. Throughout their marriage, she had respected Daniel's one request for privacy. Now, alone in what was suddenly her house alone, the forbidden space above beckoned with new urgency. She tested the handle, still locked, then continued to the bedroom where Daniel's absence pressed against her like a physical weight. That night, Eleanor woke gasping from dreams she couldn't remember. Sheets tangled around her legs. Rain continued its relentless drumming against the roof, and somewhere above, in the attic space, she heard a distinct thud, followed by what sounded like footsteps. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The house was old, unknown. Strange noises were part of its character. Daniel had always explained away the occasional mysterious sounds, but Daniel wasn't here to explain anything anymore. Eleanor lay rigid, listening as another soft thud sounded directly overhead. Then, unmistakably, the sound of something rolling across the attic floor, followed by silence. Sleep evaded her for the remainder of the night, her mind filling the darkness with possibilities both rational and impossible. Morning arrived washed in pale sunlight. Eleanor moved through the rituals of coffee making in the kitchen. Daniel had renovated 5 years earlier, custom cabinets built to accommodate her 5'4" frame. The bank notice lay where she'd left it, its red final warning header like a shout in the quiet house. 90 days to somehow find $75,000 or lose the home Daniel had poured his life into restoring. A knock at the back door interrupted her calculations. Robert Miller stood on the porch, his 75 years etched into the sun-baked creases of his face. Daniel's oldest friend, they had served together in Vietnam before returning to build lives in Millfield. Robert's arthritic hands clutched a covered casserole dish, his late wife's recipe for chicken and dumplings, kept alive through his imperfect but earnest recreations. I figured you might not feel like cooking. His gruff voice softened around the edges as Eleanor invited him in. They sat at the kitchen table, morning light catching in the prisms Daniel had hung in the windows, pieces of cut glass he had salvaged from an old church being demolished. Robert spoke of Daniel in the present tense, then caught himself, pain flickering across his weathered features. I still can't believe he didn't tell you about the money troubles. Robert shook his head, stirring his coffee with methodical precision. That was Danny, always protecting you, even when it hurt him. Daniel and Robert had spent countless evenings in the detached workshop behind the house, crafting furniture and swapping stories. If anyone knew Daniel's secrets, it would be Robert. Did he ever mention the attic to you? Eleanor kept her voice casual, though the question had pressed against her consciousness since the night's mysterious sounds. Robert Spoon paused mid-stir. The attic? He'd go up there at night sometimes. I'd see the light on when I'd let my dog out before bed. Always worked late, your Daniel. What was he working on? Robert shrugged, eyes drifting to the window. Never said exactly. Called it his legacy project. Something special, I gathered. You haven't been up there. Eleanor shook her head, explaining the locked door, Daniel's insistence it was just storage. Robert's expression shifted subtly, surprise, then something like understanding. Danny always did like his surprises. He patted her hand with gnarled fingers. Maybe it's time to take a look. After Robert left, Eleanor spent the afternoon in Daniel's study, a small room lined with bookshelves housing his collection of woodworking texts and first-edition adventure novels. His desk, crafted from walnut with dovetailed drawers, contained the ordered chaos of his business life. She began sorting through folders, looking for financial records that might explain their situation. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of warranty papers, she found a photograph she had never seen before. Daniel stood in what appeared to be the attic, early morning light streaming through a small window. He was younger, perhaps 10 years ago, holding a hammer and smiling with uncharacteristic self-consciousness at the camera. Behind him was the beginning of some wooden structure, its purpose unclear from the partial view. Eleanor turned the photograph over. Written in Daniel's neat carpenter's script, "For the child who never came." Her breath caught. They had tried for children during their first 10 years of marriage. Fertility treatments, specialists, endless disappointments that gradually hollowed out their hopes. Eventually, they had stopped discussing the possibility, finding contentment in their life together. Or so she had thought. Deeper in the drawer, Eleanor discovered a receipt dated just 1 week before Daniel entered the hospital for the final time. Millfield Toy Emporium. Hand-carved rocking horse, dollhouse furniture set, children's bookshelf. The items totaled nearly $500, an extravagance they could clearly not afford given the foreclosure notice. Why would Daniel, practical to his core, spend money they didn't have on children's toys when they had no children, no nieces or nephews, no grandchildren? The afternoon's shadows lengthened across the study floor as Eleanor continued her investigation. Behind Daniel's row of woodworking journals, she found a leather-bound notebook she had never seen before. Opening it revealed pages filled with Daniel's distinctive handwriting, dates spanning nearly a decade, each entry detailing their attempts to conceive a child. Medical appointments, treatment options, Eleanor's reactions to fertility medications. After each failed attempt, Daniel had sketched a small wooden toy, a train, a dollhouse, a tiny chair, with precise measurements noted in the margins. The final entry was dated 5 years ago. Dr. Chen says there's nothing more to try. Eleanor cried all night. I held her until she fell asleep, then came down to the workshop, started carving again. If I can't give her a child, I can at least preserve the dream of one. The journal ended there, though dozens of blank pages remained. Eleanor closed it gently, her fingers trembling. The Daniel revealed in these pages was both intimately familiar and a stranger, a man who had carried their shared grief into solitary midnight hours, transforming pain into creation. Outside, a car door slammed. Eleanor glanced through the window to see Grace Chen and her daughter Lily walking up the neighbor's driveway. They had moved into the yellow Victorian next door 3 months ago. Grace, a single mother working evening shifts at the hospital, and 8-year-old Lily with her serious eyes and untamable curls. Eleanor had exchanged pleasantries over the shared fence, but grief had prevented deeper connection. Lily caught sight of Eleanor in the window and waved enthusiastically, breaking away from her mother to run toward the Sullivan house. Grace called after her, then shrugged apologetically when Lily continued undeterred. Eleanor met the girl at the back porch door. Mom says I should bring you these cookies we baked. Lily thrust forward a plastic container decorated with mismatched stickers. Her eyes darted past Eleanor to the house's interior. Is your husband still in heaven? Eleanor accepted the container, caught between amusement and pain at the child's directness. Yes, he is. Lily nodded, processing this confirmation. I saw lights in your attic window last night. Was that his ghost? Eleanor's pulse quickened. Lights? Are you sure? Lily nodded emphatically. During the thunderstorm, There was a yellow light moving around up there. Her small finger pointed upward. Mom said it was probably just lightning reflections, but I know what I saw. Grace appeared behind her daughter, slightly breathless. I'm so sorry about Daniel, and about this one's imagination. She gently tugged Lily back. We don't bother Mrs. Sullivan with ghost stories, remember? Eleanor assured them it was fine, but Lily's words echoed in her mind long after they departed. Lights in the attic during the storm, when Eleanor had heard those inexplicable sounds. The house was old but solid, its electrical system recently updated by Daniel himself. A power surge might explain strange lights, but not the distinct sounds of movement overhead. The remainder of the afternoon passed in continued exploration of Daniel's papers. In his filing cabinet, Eleanor discovered medical records revealing the full extent of his illness, a rare, aggressive form of pancreatic cancer diagnosed over 18 months ago. Daniel had sought treatment secretly during his lumberyard trips, shielding Eleanor from the truth until the disease advanced beyond hiding. The specialist notes indicated Daniel had refused certain treatments, concerned about their cost given the family's financial situation. Daniel had known he was dying for over a year while maintaining a facade of normality. He had continued working on whatever secret project occupied the attic, spent money they didn't have on children's toys, and somehow accumulated enough debt to put their home at risk. As evening descended, Eleanor prepared a simple dinner from Robert's casserole. The quiet of the house pressed against her, punctuated only by the refrigerator's occasional hum and the ticking of the grandfather clock Daniel had restored from salvage. She found herself listening for sounds from above, both dreading and hoping to hear the mysterious movements again. After washing her solitary dinner plate, Eleanor returned to Daniel's study, determined to find something, anything, that might explain their financial situation or the attic's secrets. She emptied each drawer completely, removing the wooden dividers Daniel had crafted, checking for hidden compartments. In the bottom drawer, she noticed one section was shallower than it should be, given the drawer's external dimensions. Eleanor ran her fingers along the inside edges, feeling for inconsistencies. Near the back right corner, a small depression yielded to pressure. A subtle click, and a false bottom revealed itself. Within the hidden space lay a small envelope, unmarked and unsealed. Inside was a brass key, tarnished with age and smaller than a standard door key. Attached by a faded string was a small paper tag bearing a single word in Daniel's handwriting, attic. Her heart thundered against her ribs as she held the key between her fingers. Here was permission, left where she would eventually find it, Daniel's invitation to the space he had kept private for nearly 3 decades. Before she could act on her discovery, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, Eleanor saw Maxwell Reynolds, president of Millfield Community Bank and William's longtime golf partner. His silver BMW sat in the driveway, gleaming beneath the porch light. Eleanor slipped the attic key into her cardigan pocket before opening the door. Maxwell's sympathetic smile didn't reach his eyes as he extended manicured fingers for a perfunctory handshake. Eleanor, I wanted to personally express my condolences. Maxwell stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Daniel was a fine craftsman. The desk he built for my office remains the envy of the Regional Banking Association. Thank you for coming by. Eleanor maintained a polite distance, the foreclosure notice a phantom weight in her pocket. Maxwell moved to the living room with the confidence of someone accustomed to being welcome in any space he entered. I understand William spoke with you about selling the property. Very generous offer, considering the market. Eleanor remained standing while Maxwell lowered himself onto the sofa. I haven't made any decisions yet. Maxwell nodded with rehearsed understanding. Completely reasonable to need time. However, he removed a folder from his leather portfolio. I felt I should personally inform you of your situation. The foreclosure proceedings are quite advanced. I just received the notice today. Maxwell's eyebrows lifted in practiced concern. The notices have been sent monthly for some time. Perhaps Daniel. He let the implication hang delicately that her dead husband had hidden their financial collapse from her. What are my options? Eleanor kept her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Maxwell detailed the stark mathematics of her situation, the outstanding loan balance, accumulated fees, her limited income as a part-time librarian. The bank could legally take possession in 90 days, but as a personal courtesy to Daniel's memory, he might arrange an extension. Of course, William's offer provides the cleanest resolution. Maxwell closed the folder with a decisive snap. You'd walk away debt-free, with a modest sum to restart. The alternative? He shrugged eloquently. Foreclosure was terribly unpleasant, and it would pain me to put Daniel's widow through that process. The threat beneath his sympathy was unmistakable. Eleanor escorted him to the door with non-committal thanks for his concern, promising to consider her options carefully. After his departure, she leaned against the closed door, heart hammering in her chest. The coordinated pressure from William and Maxwell felt orchestrated, as though they were performing parts in a play whose ending had already been written. Upstairs, the attic key seemed to pulse in her pocket like a living thing. Eleanor climbed the stairs, pausing at each family photograph. Daniel teaching her to sandwood, their 20th anniversary trip to Maine, Daniel receiving a craftsmanship award from the governor. His eyes in each image held the same gentle patience, even in the later pictures when he must have known about his illness, about their financial troubles, about the countdown on their shared life. At the end of the hallway, Eleanor stood before the attic door, rolling the small key between her fingers. Whatever lay beyond this threshold had occupied Daniel's private hours for years, had drawn him away from their bed on sleepless nights, had been worth keeping separate from their shared life. The lock mechanism turned smoothly as though recently oiled. The door opened inward with a faint whisper of wood against wood, revealing a narrow staircase ascending into darkness. Eleanor fumbled for a light switch, finding a push-button fixture of the kind common in houses of this era. Soft amber light illuminated worn wooden steps leading upward. Eleanor climbed slowly, each step creaking beneath her weight. The air grew warmer as she ascended, carrying a familiar scent, linseed oil and cedar, Daniel's preferred finishing materials. At the top of the stairs, she hesitated on the threshold of a space she had never entered during their 27 years of marriage. Another light switch on the wall beckoned. Eleanor pressed it, and the attic revealed itself in the gentle glow of strategically placed lamps. Her gasp echoed in the suddenly illuminated space. This was no storage area filled with discarded furniture and forgotten holiday decorations. The attic had been transformed into a craftsman's dreamscape, a single large room with sloped ceilings following the roofline, every surface finished with the same care Daniel had lavished on the rest of their home. Polished floorboards gleamed beneath the small area rugs. Custom skylights had been installed in the roof, currently dark with night but positioned to capture maximum daylight. And in the center of it all stood what could only be described as a house within a house, a miniature dwelling built to exquisite scale, approximately 4 feet tall at its highest point, with perfectly proportioned walls, windows, and a tiny front porch. A dollhouse, but unlike any Eleanor had ever seen. This was no mass-produced toy, but a master craftsman's magnum opus, built board by miniature board, each detail executed with breathtaking precision. Eleanor approached it slowly, as though approaching a living thing that might startle. The exterior resembled their own home in miniature, the same craftsman style, the same riverstone chimney, even tiny copper rain gutters that caught the lamplight. A small brass plaque beside the front door read, "Sullivan," in delicate engraving. The front of the miniature house was hinged, designed to swing open and reveal the interior. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she unlatched the tiny mechanism. The facade swung outward, exposing room after perfect room of miniature furniture. Each piece handcrafted to scale, from the living room's mission-style armchairs to the kitchen's cast-iron stove, no larger than a deck of cards, but detailed down to the miniature burners. Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as she recognized miniature versions of their own furniture throughout the house. The grandfather clock from their hallway, the bookshelf from the study, the bed they had shared for nearly 3 decades. Daniel had recreated their entire home in exacting detail, but with one critical difference. The miniature house contained a nursery. Located where their guest bedroom would be in the real house, the nursery had been crafted with extraordinary attention. A tiny crib with hand-turned spindles stood beside a rocking chair small enough to fit in Eleanor's palm. Miniature stuffed animals lined a shelf, each sewn from scraps of fabric she recognized from their actual home. A bear made from Daniel's old flannel shirt, a rabbit from the curtains they had replaced 5 years ago. On the nursery wall hung 3 framed photographs no larger than postage stamps. Actual reduced photographs of Eleanor and Daniel on their wedding day, standing before the house the day they purchased it, and laughing together on a summer picnic. A family grouping, missing only the child. Eleanor sank to her knees before the miniature house, overwhelmed by the revelation of Daniel's secret work. Here, in this hidden space, he had preserved the dream they had been forced to abandon. Each tiny piece of furniture represented hours of meticulous craftsmanship, years of accumulated creation. This was no mere hobby. It was a testament, a memorial to what might have been. As she examined the nursery more closely, Eleanor noticed a small drawer built into the base of the crib. It slid open at her touch, revealing a collection of letters bound with faded blue ribbon. Each envelope was labeled in Daniel's careful printing. First day of school, 16th birthday, wedding day, when you're feeling lost, when you need to remember how much you're loved. With trembling fingers, Eleanor untied the ribbon and selected the envelope marked simply, "When you find this." The paper was of high quality, the kind Daniel used for special correspondence. Inside was a letter written in his distinctive hand, the ink slightly faded but perfectly legible. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you and you've finally discovered my secret workshop. I hope you'll forgive me for keeping this space to myself during our years together. It began as a place to work through my grief when we learned we couldn't have children, but it became something more, a way to preserve hope when reality offered none. Each piece in this little house contains a piece of my heart, a dream of what our life might have included. On the nights when sadness kept me awake, I would come up here and add another tiny chair, another miniature book, another small memory in waiting. It gave me peace to build this world where our child existed, even if only in wooden wishes. I know I've left you with burdens I never wanted you to carry. The medical bills grew beyond what I could manage, and I made choices to protect you from worry that may now cause you pain. For that, I am deeply sorry. But please know that every moment with you has been the greatest joy of my life, even without the children we dreamed of having. There is more to tell you about the house, about our finances, about provisions I've tried to make. Robert knows some of it. The rest is hidden where only you would think to look, in the place where we first discovered we shared the same favorite story. All my love, for all time, Daniel. Eleanor clutched the letter to her chest, tears flowing freely down her face. The reference to the place where we first discovered we shared the same favorite story was unmistakable. The used bookstore in town where they had reached for the same dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, their fingers touching over Harper Lee's masterpiece. A beginning that had led to 27 years of marriage, now ended but somehow continuing through this extraordinary revelation. As she carefully returned the letter to its envelope, Eleanor noticed a small wooden chest positioned beside the miniature house. Unlike the perfectly finished dollhouse, this appeared to be one of Daniel's earlier works, the joints slightly uneven, the finish less perfect. Her name was carved into the lid in novice lettering, a piece from their early years together, when Daniel was still learning his craft. The chest opened on smooth hinges to reveal a collection of smaller envelopes, each addressed simply to our child. Eleanor selected one at random and opened it with care, as though handling a sacred text. Inside was a letter written in Daniel's hand, dated 15 years earlier. To my son or daughter, today would have been your 10th birthday if things had worked out differently. I imagine you would be racing through the house with friends, cake frosting smeared across your face, already too cool to let your old dad hug you in front of your buddies. Your mother would take too many photographs, and you would roll your eyes but secretly love the attention. I built you a bookshelf today, a real one for your real room, even though that room remains empty. I put it in the workshop for now. Maybe someday it will hold books for another child, even if not our own. The thing about working with wood is that it teaches patience. Trees grow slowly, boards must dry properly, joinery can't be rushed. Some things simply take the time they take. I don't know if you'll ever exist except in our hearts, but I want you to know that you are loved completely, even in your absence. Your mother and I hold space for you in everything we do. And if by some miracle these letters ever reach actual hands, know that you were wanted and dreamed of long before you arrived. Love your dad. Eleanor read letter after letter, each one written for a milestone they never got to celebrate with a child who never existed. Except here, in Daniel's attic sanctuary, where he had given form to their unfulfilled dreams. The dates spanned nearly 2 decades, continuing right up to the final months of Daniel's life. Even as cancer consumed him, he had continued building this legacy, writing to this imagined child. Outside, the wind had picked up, branches scraping against the attic windows like tentative fingers. Eleanor barely noticed, lost in the revelation of Daniel's secret life. As she carefully replaced the letters in the wooden chest, her gaze fell on an area of the attic she hadn't yet explored. A small woodworking bench set up beneath one of the skylights, equipped with miniature tools sized for creating the dollhouse furnishings. On the workbench lay a project in progress, a tiny rocking horse, exquisitely detailed, but not yet fully sanded or finished. Beside it was a set of careful drawings showing the horse from multiple angles. A small note in the margin read, "For Hope's room, to be completed by August." Hope, the name they had chosen decades ago, during their brief window of anticipation before the doctors explained why children would never come. The incompleteness of the rocking horse struck Eleanor with fresh grief, a testament to work interrupted, to Daniel's belief that he had more time than fate had granted. She ran her fingers over the smooth curves of the miniature horse, feeling the warmth of the wood beneath her touch. As she turned back toward the miniature house, something caught her eye. A small, dark space beneath the dollhouse's foundation, accessible from the back. Eleanor crouched down, peering into the shadows. What appeared to be another drawer was built into the structure's base, concealed from casual observation. She worked her fingers into the narrow opening, feeling for a mechanism. The hidden drawer slid open with a smooth whisper. Inside lay a flash drive and a folded document bearing the letterhead of Millfield Community Bank. Eleanor lifted the paper with unsteady hands, unfolding what appeared to be a loan modification agreement. The details swam before her tear-blurred eyes. Daniel's signature, dates from 3 months earlier, terms showing their mortgage had been successfully restructured with affordable payments. At the bottom, a handwritten note in Daniel's distinctive script, "Eleanor, this is the real agreement. Maxwell has a copy. Don't trust William or the foreclosure notices. Robert has the rest. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything before it was too late." Eleanor's mind raced. The foreclosure notice, Maxwell's visit, William's convenient offer to buy the house, all based on a financial crisis that had apparently been resolved before Daniel's death. A crisis that someone wanted her to believe was still looming. She reached for the flash drive, turning it over in her palm. Whatever it contained might explain the contradiction between the documents she'd found today, the foreclosure notice versus this loan modification agreement. She needed a computer to view its contents and answers that might lie with Robert, whom Daniel had apparently entrusted with information he hadn't had time to share with her. As Eleanor carefully returned everything to its place, preparing to descend from the attic with her discoveries, the house below her suddenly plunged into darkness. The attic lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, leaving her in perfect blackness, pierced only by occasional flashes of lightning from the gathering storm outside. Power outage. Not uncommon in their neighborhood during storms, but the timing sent a chill through Eleanor's body. She felt for the flashlight she'd brought up with her, the beam creating a small island of visibility in the darkened attic. As she moved toward the stairs, a loud crash from the first floor froze her in place, the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Someone was in the house. Eleanor extinguished her flashlight, heart hammering against her ribs. In the darkness, lightning briefly illuminated the attic through the skylights, the miniature house at the center looking eerily like a ghost of her own home below. She strained to hear over the rumble of thunder, catching the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving through the first floor. Her mind raced through possibilities. A fallen branch breaking a window, neighborhood teenagers, a desperate intruder taking advantage of the blackout, or something more deliberate, connected to the documents she'd just discovered. The timing felt too convenient to be coincidence. Another flash of lightning revealed the workbench with Daniel's miniature woodworking tools, tiny chisels and hammers that would be useless as weapons. Beside them stood a full-size toolbox, presumably containing the instruments Daniel had used to build the attic's larger features. Eleanor crept toward it, easing the lid open without making a sound. Her fingers closed around the smooth handle of a hammer, not large but solid and reassuring in her palm. The footsteps below had reached the second floor, moving with purpose rather than the random searching pattern of an opportunistic burglar. Whoever was in her house knew what they were looking for. Eleanor retreated to the darkest corner of the attic, positioning herself beside the staircase where she could see anyone coming up before they saw her. Minutes stretched like hours as the footsteps methodically moved from room to room below. Eventually, they approached the hallway leading to the attic stairs. A flashlight beam appeared at the bottom of the staircase, sweeping upward. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, hammer clutched in white-knuckled fingers. The beam paused, then began ascending one step at a time, accompanied by the creak of wood under cautious footfalls. When the intruder reached the top step, the flashlight beam swept across the attic space, illuminating the miniature house in its center. A low whistle of appreciation cut through the darkness. So this is what old Danny was hiding all these years. The voice was instantly recognizable. William Sullivan, his usual polished tones were rough with surprise. He advanced into the attic, flashlight focused on the dollhouse. Waste of damn time and money, but I'll give him credit. The craftsmanship is remarkable. This'll fetch a pretty penny from the right collector. Eleanor remained frozen in her corner, processing the implications of William's words and presence. He had broken into her house during a power outage, making his way directly to the attic she had only discovered hours earlier. He knew about the dollhouse. He knew its value. And he clearly believed he had a right to it. William circled the miniature house, his flashlight beam lingering on particular details. The workmanship is museum quality. He might have been a financial fool, but my brother certainly knew his wood. He reached out to touch the tiny front door, and something in Eleanor snapped. The hammer remained clutched in her hand, but instead of confrontation, she found her voice. "It's not for sale, William." The flashlight beam whipped toward her hiding place, momentarily blinding her. Eleanor stepped forward into its glare. Empty-handed now, the hammer returned silently to the workbench behind her. "Jesus Christ, Eleanor!" William's voice cracked with startled anger. "What the hell are you doing hiding up here in the dark? I could ask you the same question." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "How did you get into my house?" The back door was unlocked. William lowered the flashlight slightly, but kept it trained in her direction. "I was worried about you during the storm, with the power out. When you didn't answer the door." Eleanor let his lie hang in the silence between them. They both knew the back door had been locked. She had checked twice before coming upstairs, a habit formed during 27 years in this house. She also knew, with certainty born of this day's discoveries, that William had come with specific purpose. "How did you know about this place?" She gestured to the dollhouse, illuminated in the edge of his flashlight beam. "Daniel never showed it to anyone." William's hesitation was brief but telling. "Danny mentioned his woodworking projects. I assumed he kept his materials up here." "You assumed breaking into Myvan House during a power outage was the appropriate time to check." Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating William's face. The familiar Sullivan features hardened into something Eleanor had never seen during family gatherings. For a moment, she glimpsed the ruthless businessman beneath the veneer of concerned brother-in-law. "Let's not be dramatic, Eleanor." William's voice regained its smooth, patronizing edge. "I was concerned. The storm, you alone in this big house so soon after Danny's passing. I'm only trying to help, by offering to buy my home at half its market value, by working with Maxwell to convince me I'm facing foreclosure." The silence that followed confirmed her suspicions more clearly than any confession. William's flashlight beam dipped momentarily, then steadied. "You're confused, Eleanor. Grief does that. The foreclosure is real. Danny made a mess of your finances, his medical bills alone." He gestured vaguely with his free hand. "I'm offering you a lifeline." Eleanor stepped closer to the miniature house, positioning herself between it and William. "I found the loan modification agreement Daniel signed 3 months ago, the one Maxwell countersigned. There is no foreclosure." For the first time, William seemed genuinely taken aback. His flashlight beam wavered as he processed this information. After a moment, he recovered his composure with a dismissive laugh. "Danny could barely sign his name by then. Whatever document you think you found, it won't hold up. The bank has already initiated proceedings." His voice hardened. You need to be realistic, Eleanor. This house is beyond your means to maintain. My offer is more than fair. Eleanor thought of the flash drive in her pocket, the letter mentioning evidence Daniel had left with Robert, the mysterious lights Lily had seen in the attic last night, perhaps William's first attempt to access this space and assess its contents. I need you to leave, William. Now, Eleanor. His tone was a warning. Or I call the police and report a break-in. She held his gaze in the dim light. I'm sure they'd be interested in how you gained entry during a power outage. Something shifted in William's posture, a recalculation of approaches, a businessman recognizing when to retreat and regroup. He lowered the flashlight to a less aggressive position. You're making a mistake. His voice was soft, almost sympathetic. That document won't change anything. Maxwell will confirm the foreclosure is proceeding. We can still handle this as family, or it can get very unpleasant. Eleanor remained silent, her position beside Daniel's masterpiece unwavering. After a moment, William turned and descended the stairs, his flashlight beam bouncing ahead of him. Eleanor followed at a distance, watching as he moved through the darkened house with suspicious familiarity, exiting through the back door he had claimed was unlocked. When the door closed behind him, Eleanor secured both locks and leaned against the solid wood, her legs suddenly weak with delayed reaction. Outside, car doors slammed. Plural, she noted. William hadn't come alone. The engine started, headlights swept across the kitchen windows, then receded down the driveway. In the storm-darkened kitchen, Eleanor sank into a chair, mind racing with implications. William and Maxwell were working together, using her grief and Daniel's death to claim the property for far less than it's worth. Daniel had anticipated this, leaving evidence with Robert and hidden in the attic. The dollhouse, Daniel's masterpiece, was valuable enough that William had broken into her home to assess it, and somewhere there was a connection to a child who had never existed except in Daniel's patient, loving craftsmanship. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the kitchen where she sat alone. The house creaked and settled around her, no longer merely a structure of wood and stone, but a repository of secrets only beginning to reveal themselves. Above her, the attic waited with its extraordinary testament to love and loss, to dreams preserved in miniature when they couldn't be realized in life. Eleanor clutched the flash drive in her palm, determination hardening within her like one of Daniel's fine wood finishes, layer upon layer of resolve. Whatever game William and Maxwell were playing, they had underestimated both Daniel's foresight and the strength of the woman he had left behind. The storm continued through the night, but Eleanor no longer feared the sounds from above. The attic was no longer a forbidden mystery, but a sanctuary, a space where Daniel's spirit lived on in every tiny doorframe, every miniature floorboard, every letter written to a child who existed only in possibility. Whatever came next, whatever battle awaited with William in the bank, she would face it with the knowledge that Daniel had built not just a dollhouse, but a fortress of evidence in memory to protect her when he no longer could. Dawn arrived with tentative fingers of light through rain-washed windows. Eleanor had slept in short, fitful bursts, jolting awake at every creak of the old house settling. The storm had passed, but the emotional tempest within her was only beginning to gather force. She placed the flash drive and loan modification document in a wooden box Daniel had carved early in their marriage, then tucked it beneath a loose floorboard in their bedroom closet, a hiding place they'd used for Christmas presents and anniversary surprises over the years. The morning demanded immediate action. Eleanor showered and dressed with purposeful efficiency, fortifying herself with strong coffee before driving to the Millfield Public Library, where she'd worked part-time for 15 years. The building wouldn't open to the public for another 2 hours, perfect for what she needed to accomplish. Marjorie, the head librarian, looked up in surprise as Eleanor entered through the staff door. Your bereavement leave isn't over for another week. Is everything all right? Eleanor settled at a computer terminal in the reference section, away from Marjorie's concerned gaze. I need to research some legal matters. The library's internet connection was faster than her home service, and she couldn't risk William or Maxwell tracking her online activities on her personal devices. For the next hour, Eleanor immersed herself in foreclosure laws, property rights, and loan modification agreements. The legal terminology swam before her eyes, But certain facts emerged with crystal clarity. A properly executed loan modification agreement, signed by both borrower and lender, superseded previous foreclosure threats. If Daniel had indeed secured this agreement before his death, William and Maxwell's pressure campaign was not merely manipulative. It was potentially fraudulent. Eleanor printed relevant statutes and case summaries, creating a folder of ammunition for whatever battle lay ahead. As she worked, her mind kept returning to the miniature house in the attic, Daniel's labor of love built in secret over decades. The craftsmanship alone represented thousands of hours of meticulous work. Its value as art was significant, but its emotional worth was immeasurable. The flash drive would have to wait. Eleanor couldn't risk viewing its contents on a library computer, where others might see whatever Daniel had thought important enough to preserve digitally. She needed an ally, someone who knew Daniel well enough to understand what they were facing. Robert Miller's modest ranch house sat 3 blocks from the Sullivan home, its front yard distinguished by military-precise landscaping, a habit retained from his Vietnam service. His ancient golden retriever, Scout, announced Eleanor's arrival with a half-hearted woof from his sunny spot on the porch. Robert appeared in the doorway before she reached the steps, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Didn't expect to see you so soon after yesterday." His eyes narrowed, taking in her tense posture. "Something's happened." Eleanor followed him into a living room dominated by bookshelves built by Daniel years earlier. The familiar scent of pipe tobacco and gun oil hung in the air, comforting reminders of a generation of men who built things to last. She placed the loan modification agreement on the coffee table between them. "Daniel left me a note saying you have information about our financial situation, about William." Robert's expression hardened as he examined the document. The arthritic fingers that had once field-stripped rifles in darkness now traced Daniel's signature with reverent precision. "So you found the attic?" Eleanor nodded, describing her discovery of the dollhouse, the letters, and William's intrusion during the power outage. Robert listened without interruption, his jaw tightening at the mention of William's break-in. Danny suspected something like this might happen. Robert rose slowly, his knees protesting with audible pops, and moved to a gun cabinet in the corner. Instead of opening it, he pressed a hidden latch beneath the carved molding, revealing a small compartment containing a sealed envelope. "3 months ago, your husband asked me to keep this safe. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you when you came asking the right questions." The envelope contained a USB drive identical to the one Eleanor had found in the dollhouse, along with a handwritten note. "Robert, this is the backup. Eleanor has the original. If you're reading this, I'm gone and she's found the attic. Tell her everything now. D. Your husband knew he was dying for over a year." Robert's voice caught slightly, emotional terrain as difficult for him to navigate as the physical limitations of aging. He refused additional treatment when the doctors said it would only buy months at ridiculous expense. Said he needed to finish his projects more than he needed extra time and pain. Eleanor's vision blurred with fresh tears. "What projects? Just the dollhouse?" Robert shook his head, retrieving a worn photo album from a nearby shelf. "Daniel and me, we served in a reconnaissance unit in Vietnam. Learned to build things from nothing, to notice details others missed. Those skills saved our lives over there. When we came home, Danny put them into his woodworking. I put mine into other pursuits." The album contained photos Eleanor had never seen. Daniel and Robert in their 20s, working together on increasingly complex woodworking projects. The final pages showed the beginnings of the attic transformation, with Daniel carefully measuring and finishing the space that would house his masterpiece. "He started building that dollhouse the day after your last miscarriage." Robert's bluntness was softened by the gentle way he closed the album. Said if he couldn't give you a real child to fill a real nursery, he'd create something that preserved the possibility forever. Worked on it almost every night for 20 years. "But why keep it from me?" Eleanor's question emerged as a whisper. At first, he thought it would be temporary, just until you had recovered from the loss. Then it became his private devotion, a way to process grief you both carried. By the time years had passed, he worried showing it to you would only reopen old wounds. The older we get, the harder it becomes to change our patterns. "And William? The loan agreement?" Robert's expression darkened. Danny suspected his brother had designs on the property for years. That riverfront land has become valuable since the new highway exit was approved. William kept pushing Danny to sell, especially after your cancer diagnosis. When Danny got sick himself, the pressure intensified. He knew William and Maxwell were cooking up something, so he secretly recorded their conversations. What kind of conversations? The kind that would end a banking career and possibly result in criminal charges. Those USB drives contain audio files. Danny installed recording devices in the workshop where he met with William and in Maxwell's office during a loan consultation. Unethical as hell and probably inadmissible in court, but damning all the same. They discussed waiting for Danny to die, then manipulating you into selling the property at a fraction of its worth. Fury rose in Eleanor's chest, momentarily displacing grief. They're still doing it. William broke into my house last night to examine the dollhouse. He knows it's valuable. Robert nodded grimly. Miniature artistry at that level can fetch tens of thousands from collectors. Add the story behind it, the connection to your situation. Some people would pay small fortunes for such a piece, but the real prize is the land. Williams Development Company has been buying up properties along that stretch of river for 3 years. Eleanor's mind raced ahead, assembling the pieces. So Daniel secured the loan modification to protect me, knowing William would try to claim the house was in foreclosure after his death. And Maxwell agreed to it while planning to deny its existence once Danny was gone. Robert's disgust was palpable. Your husband was always the better man. Even dying, he outmaneuvered them, left breadcrumbs for you to follow. Eleanor clutched the USB drive, this tangible piece of Daniel's foresight. I need your computer. The audio files confirmed everything Robert had suggested and worse. Daniel, already ill but clear-minded, had captured multiple conversations in which William and Maxwell discussed their post-Danny strategy for acquiring the Sullivan property. They mentioned specific developers willing to pay millions for the assembled river parcels once rezoning was approved, a process William claimed was already in the bag thanks to his connections on the town council. Most damning was Maxwell's explicit acknowledgement of the loan modification agreement, followed by his assurance to William that once your brother's gone, the document can disappear. We'll tell the widow it was never properly executed. She'll have no choice but to sell to you or face foreclosure. Eleanor felt physically ill listening to the calculated coldness with which they discussed exploiting her bereavement. Daniel's voice appeared occasionally, playing along just enough to gather evidence while protecting her from both the knowledge of his terminal diagnosis and their predatory scheme. I need copies of everything. Eleanor's voice had hardened to match Robert's military precision. And I need to understand exactly what Daniel was building in that attic. Not just the dollhouse, the whole legacy project. Robert nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. Time to meet Sophie. The children's wing of Millfield Memorial Hospital bustled with afternoon activity. Robert led Eleanor through corridors decorated with cartoon characters until they reached a recreation room where a therapy session was in progress. Through the observation window, Eleanor immediately recognized a familiar small figure with untamable curls. Lily Chen focused intently on a wooden puzzle. That's Grace's daughter. Eleanor's confusion was evident. Why are we here? Robert gestured toward the child. Look closer. What do you see? Eleanor studied the little girl, the serious concentration as her small fingers manipulated wooden pieces, the methodical approach to solving the puzzle, the way she unconsciously tucked her hair behind her right ear when thinking deeply. Mannerisms startlingly familiar because she had watched Daniel perform those exact movements at his workbench for 27 years. The therapist noticed their presence and approached, recognition lighting her face when she saw Robert. Mr. Miller, Sophie's been asking when you'd visit again. Sophie, not Lily. Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her feet as reality realigned. Afterward, they sat in the hospital cafeteria, coffee cooling untouched between them. Robert explained the connection Eleanor had already begun to piece together. Daniel had volunteered at the hospital's children's wing for years, teaching simple woodworking skills to pediatric long-term patients. 3 years ago, he had formed a special bond with a 5-year-old orphan named Sophie, a girl whose natural aptitude for woodcraft mirrored his own. She was born with a heart condition, multiple surgeries, no family to speak of, bounced between foster homes that couldn't handle her medical needs. Robert's voice softened with affection. Danny saw himself in her, the way she approached problems, her patience with difficult tasks, started bringing her specialized tools sized for small hands. Eleanor remembered finding tiny woodworking implements in Daniel's workshop, assuming they were for his miniature projects, never questioning why some showed signs of less skilled usage or why certain afternoons were blocked off on his calendar with only the letter S. As her condition stabilized, Danny began the adoption process. Robert watched Eleanor's expression carefully. He didn't tell you because he wasn't sure it would be approved. Single income family, your recent cancer, his age. Then his own diagnosis came. The pieces locked into place with devastating clarity. Daniel, knowing he was dying, had withdrawn his adoption application rather than leave Sophie to lose another parent so soon. Instead, he had worked behind the scenes to find her a suitable placement. With Grace Chen, a pediatric nurse who had cared for Sophie during her hospitalizations. They moved in next door 3 months ago. Robert confirmed her realization. Grace took a position at Millfield General specifically to keep Sophie close to Danny during his final months. The name change to Lily was Grace's idea, a fresh start for a child who'd known too much loss already. Eleanor recalled Sophie/Lily's fascination with the Sullivan house, her insistence on bringing cookies, her claims about seeing lights in the attic. Not imagination or coincidence, the child had been drawn to the home she almost shared, to the man who had built a miniature world while hoping to welcome her into the real one. I need to speak with Grace. Eleanor gathered her purse and the folder of evidence, mind already racing ahead. Grace Chen opened her door with the weary efficiency of someone who had just finished a 12-hour hospital shift. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by wariness, as she noted Robert standing behind Eleanor on the porch. You know, don't you? Inside the modest rental home, evidence of Sophie's presence permeated every corner. Wooden toys reminiscent of Daniel's style, books about building and creating, a small workbench sized for a child. Grace sank onto the sofa, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. Daniel made me promise not to tell you until after. She gestured vaguely, encompassing the nebulous territory of grief. He was afraid the knowledge would only compound your loss. How much did he tell you about our situation? Eleanor kept her voice gentle, aware she was addressing not an adversary but another person navigating Daniel's complex legacy. That you'd tried to have children for years without success. That he'd built something special in the attic he'd never shown you. Grace's clinical precision softened into compassion. That his brother was a vulture circling your home. He made me swear to watch out for suspicious activity after he was gone, to call Robert if I noticed anything concerning. Like lights in the attic during a storm? Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Grace nodded. Sophie saw William the night before last. She'd gotten up for water and noticed flashlights moving around upstairs in your house. I called Robert immediately. The interconnected web of protection Daniel had woven around her became clearer with each revelation. Robert, the guardian of financial evidence. Grace, the watchful neighbor. Sophie, the unexpected link to a future Daniel had envisioned, but wouldn't live to see. Is she happy here? With you? The question emerged from Eleanor's deepest concerns, not for herself, but for the child Daniel had loved. Grace's smile was tired but genuine. We're finding our way. She's extraordinary, resilient in ways I can barely comprehend. She misses Daniel terribly, asks about him every day. About you too, though she's afraid you might be angry that she knew your husband's secret. Eleanor processed this with a sharp intake of breath. The child had carried the burden of adult secrets, fearing rejection from the woman who should have been her adoptive mother. I'd like to meet her. Properly this time. As Sophie. The reunion occurred that evening on neutral ground, the small park between their homes where Sophie often played after school. The child approached cautiously, her steps slowing as she reached the bench where Eleanor waited. Recognition flickered in her eyes, not of Eleanor the neighbor, but of Eleanor, the woman from Daniel's photographs, the one who should have been her mother. You found his special room. Sophie's direct address, so characteristic of children, caught Eleanor off guard. The secret place where he built the little house. Eleanor nodded, patting the bench beside her. I did. It's extraordinary. Did you ever see it? Sophie climbed onto the bench, feet dangling above the ground. Once, when I was in the hospital for a longer time and couldn't sleep, he showed me pictures. Said he built it for the child who never came, but that someday it might belong to me. Her small fingers traced patterns on the wooden slats. He said it was a house inside a house, like a secret heart beating inside a bigger heart. The poetic description, so like Daniel's way of explaining complex emotions through tangible metaphors, brought fresh tears to Eleanor's eyes. She blinked them away, not wanting to frighten the child with excessive emotion. Would you like to see it? For real this, fam? Sophie's eyes widened, hope and hesitation warring in her expression. She nodded solemnly, then reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded paper. Before I forget, he gave me this. Said to give it to you if you ever found the little house. I've been carrying it every day, waiting. The paper contained a hand-drawn map of the Sullivan house, marked with X's at specific locations throughout the structure. At the bottom, Daniel had written, "Treasure hunt," for Sophie to give Eleanor when the time is right. The first X marked a location in the kitchen, beneath the loose floorboard where Daniel had always hidden Eleanor's birthday presents. Together, they pried up the board to reveal a small wooden box containing an antique silver pocket watch, a Sullivan family heirloom passed down for 5 generations that had been missing since Daniel's hospitalization. He said this was for his child to have someday. Sophie's voice was hushed with reverence as Eleanor placed the watch gently in her small palm. Now that's you. The treasure hunt led them throughout the house, each location yielding another significant item. The first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, they had both reached for the day they met, now inscribed with a love letter to Eleanor. A small wooden music box that played the lullaby Daniel's mother had sung to him, a collection of family recipes handwritten by Eleanor's grandmother. The final X led to the attic, to the miniature house that had preserved hope through decades of disappointment. Sophie stood transfixed before it, her fingers hovering reverently near the tiny porch columns. It's our house, but small enough for magic to live in it. Eleanor watched as the child carefully opened the hinged facade, gasping with delight at each perfect room revealed within. When she discovered the nursery, Sophie turned to Eleanor with solemn eyes. This was supposed to be my room, wasn't it? The question contained no accusation, only the straightforward curiosity of a child seeking to understand her place in a complex adult world. Eleanor nodded, finding truth simpler than explanation. Yes, I think it was. Sophie considered this, then pointed to a tiny wooden chest in the miniature nursery, one Eleanor hadn't noticed during her initial exploration. He said there was a special treasure in there just for you, that when you found it, you'd understand everything. The miniature chest opened to reveal an impossibly small, carved wooden heart, no larger than a thimble. Inscribed on its surface in microscopic lettering were the words, "What is essential is invisible to the eye." The quote from The Little Prince, Daniel's favorite book, the one he had read aloud to Eleanor during her cancer treatments. Below the heart lay a final note in Daniel's handwriting. The most precious treasures take unexpected forms. Look in the workshop wall safe. Combination 527-815. Our first date. What you find there will change everything. I'm sorry I kept so many secrets. They were meant to protect, never to harm. All my love, always. The workshop behind the house had been Daniel's domain, a converted carriage house filled with tools, lumber, and the scent of creativity. Eleanor had avoided it since his death, but now she entered with Sophie beside her, the child's presence somehow making the space less painfully empty. The wall safe was concealed behind a large blueprint cabinet. Eleanor entered the combination with trembling fingers, each number a testament to Daniel's sentimental nature, preserving their beginning even as he prepared for his end. The door swung open to reveal a thick manila envelope and a smaller padded mailer. Inside the manila envelope was a complete second copy of the loan modification agreement, notarized and bearing an official seal, along with full documentation of William and Maxwell's scheme. Daniel had compiled bank statements, property assessments, and transcripts of recorded conversations into a compelling case file. A sticky note attached to the front read, "For attorney Sarah Livingston, call only if necessary." The smaller package contained something Eleanor would never have anticipated: adoption paperwork for Sophie, fully processed except for the final signatures, along with a judge's conditional approval pending home assessment. Daniel had continued the process despite his illness, changing it from a joint adoption to Eleanor as sole adoptive parent. His attached note explained, I know this is presumptuous, but I couldn't bear to close this door entirely. If this isn't what you want, I understand completely. But if it is, everything is prepared. Sophie needs a home. You need the daughter you've always deserved. The choice is yours, with no obligation or expectation. Eleanor sank onto Daniel's workshop stool, documents clutched to her chest, overwhelming emotion rendering her momentarily speechless. Sophie approached cautiously, intuiting the gravity of the moment without understanding its details. Are you sad again? The child's directness was refreshing amid the adult complexities swirling around them. Eleanor shook her head slowly. Not sad exactly, just discovering how much your almost dad loved us both. Over the following days, Eleanor immersed herself in learning the truth Daniel had protected her from during his illness. She reviewed his medical records, discovering he had been diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer 18 months earlier, with a prognosis of 6 to 8 months. He had survived nearly twice that long, driven by determination to complete his projects, the dollhouse, Sophie's adoption arrangements, and the evidence against William and Maxwell. Robert helped her transfer Daniel's audio recordings to secure storage and introduced her to a retired detective willing to assess their legal significance. The news was mixed. The recordings themselves might be inadmissible in court due to consent issues, but they provided a roadmap for investigation that could lead to admissible evidence. Eleanor started documenting the dollhouse, photographing its extraordinary details, and researching similar works of miniature artistry. She discovered that Daniel's craftsmanship rivaled that of museum-quality pieces valued at $50,000 or more. Online miniature enthusiast forums responded with astonishment to her carefully anonymized posts showing select details of Daniel's work. Through careful questioning, she learned that William had already contacted several high-end collectors about an exceptional miniature property becoming available soon. Further evidence of his assumption that he would gain control of the Sullivan house and its contents. His confidence suggested he had accelerated his timeline for forcing Eleanor to sell. That suspicion proved correct when Eleanor received notice of a competency hearing, initiated by William as Daniel's next of kin, questioning her ability to manage her affairs following her husband's death. The filing cited erratic behavior, paranoid allegations, and emotional instability as grounds for appointing a financial conservator, William himself naturally, to oversee the Sullivan estate. The legal maneuver was transparent in its manipulative intent, but dangerous nonetheless. Eleanor realized William was establishing groundwork to invalidate any accusations she might make regarding the foreclosure fraud. If declared incompetent, her claims about loan modifications and recorded evidence would be dismissed as delusions. Sophie became an unexpected ally in this battle, her presence providing both emotional support and practical assistance. The child's methodical nature, so like Daniel's, proved invaluable as they systematically explored every corner of the house, documenting its condition and contents to counter any claims of neglect or mismanagement. During one such documentation session, Sophie discovered a hidden compartment beneath the dollhouse's garden, a meticulously crafted miniature cellar accessible through a concealed trapdoor. Inside was a handwritten journal detailing Daniel's illness from diagnosis to final decline, along with records of treatments declined and medical bills carefully managed to preserve Eleanor's financial security. The most poignant entries describe Daniel's determination to complete the dollhouse nursery despite worsening symptoms. Hands shaking today, took 3 attempts to finish the crib spindles. Working in shorter sessions now, Eleanor suspects something but doesn't press. Her kindness makes this deception both harder and more necessary. We'll finish the rocking horse next. After that, the music box. Must keep working. Time growing short. Eleanor shared these discoveries with Grace, whose medical background provided context for Daniel's decisions. He refused treatments that would have incapacitated him without significantly extending his life, made quality of remaining time the priority over quantity. Grace's clinical assessment softened with compassion. He used his final months exactly as he chose, creating beauty, protecting you, securing Sophie's future. Many patients never achieve such clarity of purpose. The morning of the competency hearing dawned with ominous gray clouds gathering over Millfield. Eleanor had prepared meticulously, assembling documentation of her sound financial planning, regular home maintenance, and continued employment at the library. Sarah Livingston, and the attorney Daniel had recommended, had agreed to represent her after reviewing the evidence against William and Maxwell. Eleanor dressed with deliberate care in a conservative navy suit, arranging her silver-streaked brown hair in a simple updo that projected stability and competence. As she descended the stairs, a wave of dizziness struck without warning, forcing her to clutch the banister for support. The sensation passed quickly, but left a hollow feeling in its wake, stress taking physical form, she assumed. The temporary weakness was forgotten as she focused on the day ahead. Eleanor packed her documentation into Daniel's leather portfolio, the tangible connection to him providing courage for the confrontation to come. She had arranged for Sophie to stay with Robert during the hearing, protecting the child from witnessing the ugliness of William's tactics. The plan unraveled when Eleanor stepped onto the front porch to find William already waiting, accompanied by a balding man in a rumpled suit who introduced himself as Dr. Everett, court-appointed evaluator. William's smile carried the cold precision of a predator who believes its prey is cornered. The judge requested a preliminary assessment before the formal hearing, just a routine conversation in familiar surroundings. William's reasonable tone belied the ambushed nature of this unexpected visit. Eleanor recognized the trap immediately. Any refusal would be documented as paranoia or obstruction, supporting William's claims of her incompetence. Any emotional reaction would be noted as evidence of instability. She had no choice but to invite them inside, where William moved through the house with proprietary confidence, pointing out minor maintenance issues to Dr. Everett while making offhand comments about overwhelming responsibilities and understandable decline following bereavement. Dr. Everett's questions seemed innocuous at first, about Eleanor's daily routines, social connections, future plans, but gradually probed toward potential vulnerabilities. Had she experienced confusion recently? Difficulty remembering appointments? Heard or seen things others didn't notice? The calculated insinuation that grief had compromised her grip on reality became increasingly transparent. Eleanor maintained composed responses until Williams suggested they examine the attic to demonstrate her ability to maintain all areas of the property. His deliberate emphasis on the word attic confirmed Eleanor's suspicion that this evaluation was orchestrated specifically to document her reaction to the dollhouse, to frame Daniel's masterwork as evidence of shared delusion. "I'd be happy to show Dr. Everett the attic workshop." Eleanor's calm acquiescence visibly surprised William, "including my late husband's dollhouse project, which has been appraised by Harrington's auction house at approximately $60,000. I've documented its provenance and artistic significance for insurance purposes." The professional reference point shifted the dynamic instantly. Dr. Everett's expression changed from clinical assessment to genuine interest, while William's momentary shock revealed he hadn't anticipated Eleanor's awareness of the dollhouse's monetary value. As they climbed the stairs, Eleanor maintained a measured narrative about Daniel's craftsmanship being recognized in woodworking circles, his specialized techniques for miniature joinery, the increasing collector market for museum-quality miniatures. She transformed what William had intended to present as obsessive behavior into a rational investment in valuable artisanal work. The strategy succeeded until they entered the attic space. Dr. Everett appropriately admired the dollhouse's extraordinary craftsmanship, noting its quality and attention to detail. William, recognizing his approach was backfiring, abruptly changed tactics. Of course, Eleanor knows all the technical terminology now. His conspiratorial tone addressed the doctor directly. "She's been researching obsessively since discovering Daniel's secret project. Shows signs of transference, believing the dollhouse somehow represents the child they never had." Her voice trembled, and she wept when showing it to the neighbor's daughter. Disturbing behavior, wouldn't you agree? The calculated cruelty of weaponizing her grief ignited something primal in Eleanor's chest. The weeks of restraint, of strategic planning, of documented evidence, all momentarily eclipsed by raw fury at William's willingness to distort Daniel's legacy of love into something pathological. "The dollhouse represents 20 years of my husband's devotion, not delusion." Eleanor's voice emerged with unexpected strength. "Daniel built it while you were scheming to take this property the moment he died, while you and Maxwell Reynolds were planning to fabricate foreclosure proceedings, while you were recording as Daniel's primary contact at the hospital, so you'd be first to know when he wouldn't be able to stop you anymore. William's face flushed with anger, his calculated facade cracking. You're proving my point with these paranoid accusations. Maxwell Reynolds is a respected banker. These conspiracy theories about recordings and secret plans are exactly why we're concerned about your mental state. Eleanor turned to Dr. Everett, whose neutral professional expression had given way to uncomfortable awareness that he had entered a situation more complex than the routine evaluation he'd expected. Would you like to hear the recordings, Dr. Everett? Or read the notarized loan modification agreement Maxwell claims doesn't exist? Or perhaps the police report I filed regarding the break-in during the power outage 3 nights ago? William's hand shot out, knocking over a small workbench lamp. The sudden movement startled all three of them, the crashing sound abnormally loud in the confined attic space. Glass shattered across the floor as William stepped toward Eleanor, his controlled demeanor abandoned. That's enough. You think Daniel was so clever with his secret recordings? His sick little fantasy house? His pathetic attempt to adopt some damaged foster child because you couldn't have your own? William's voice rose with each accusation, spittle flying from his lips. He was weak, always weak, sentimental garbage instead of practical business sense. And now you're carrying on his tradition of irrational emotional decisions. Dr. Everett moved between them, professional concern evident in his posture. I think we should continue this evaluation another time. Mr. Sullivan, I must ask you to moderate your tone and maintain appropriate distance from your sister-in-law. William ignored the doctor, years of resentment finally breaking through his polished exterior. You think you can stop the foreclosure with some paperwork Danny Boy forged? You think your pathetic librarian's salary can maintain this property? His hand swept toward the dollhouse with contemptuous dismissal. You'll lose everything. The house. This ridiculous toy. Any chance of keeping that broken little girl he wanted to saddle you with. The threatening movement toward the dollhouse triggered Eleanor's protective instincts. She lunged forward, positioning herself between William and Daniel's masterpiece. The sudden movement combined with the earlier dizziness caused her to lose balance on the uneven attic floorboards. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the edge of an area rug. Time seemed to slow as Eleanor felt herself falling. Her shoulder struck the corner of Daniel's workbench, pain exploding through her upper body. Her head followed, connecting with the solid wood floor with a sickening thud. The impact sent black spots dancing across her vision, consciousness receding like tide pulled by an invisible moon. The last thing Eleanor registered before darkness claimed her was William's expression. Not concern for her injury, but calculation of how this development might serve his purposes. Eleanor regained consciousness in the sterile brightness of Millfield General Hospital. The rhythmic beeping of monitoring equipment provided disorienting counterpoint to the throbbing pain in her head and shoulder. Grace Chen stood beside the bed, her professional nurse's demeanor softened by personal concern. Easy now. Mild concussion and shoulder contusion. You've been out about 4 hours. Grace adjusted the bed to a more comfortable sitting position. Robert has Sophie. She's worried but safe. Eleanor's memory reassembled itself in fragments. The competency evaluation, William's outburst, her fall in the attic. Fear surged through her foggy consciousness. The dollhouse. Is it safe? William was threatening it. Grace's expression provided reassurance. Robert went to the house immediately, changed the locks, installed a security system. The attic is secure. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. The police took statements from you before you were fully conscious, and from Dr. Everett. William is claiming you became disoriented and fell while having some kind of episode. The doctor's account was more nuanced. Eleanor attempted to sit up further, ignoring the protest from her injured shoulder. I need to get back home. The competency hearing has been postponed pending medical evaluation. Grace gently prevented Eleanor from removing the monitoring leads. Which brings me to something we need to discuss. The CT scan for your concussion showed some unusual findings. Dr. Westfield ordered additional tests while you were unconscious. Blood work, hormone panels. The clinical shift in Grace's tone triggered alarm bells in Eleanor's mind. What findings? What's wrong? Grace took a deep breath, professional training providing structure for delivering unexpected news. Your hormone levels are highly unusual for a woman your age. Specifically, your HCG levels are elevated in a pattern consistent with pregnancy. Eleanor stared blankly, certain she had misheard through the fog of concussion. That's impossible. I'm 52 years old. Daniel and I tried for years when I was in my 20s and 30s. The fertility specialist said I couldn't conceive. Grace nodded, acknowledging the apparent impossibility. That's why Dr. Westfield ordered comprehensive testing. The results are definitive. You're approximately 10 weeks pregnant. The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor, despite her lying stationary in the hospital bed. Mathematical impossibility collided with medical certainty, creating cognitive dissonance that her concussed brain struggled to reconcile. But how? The question emerged as a whisper. Grace pulled a chair beside the bed, shifting from nurse to confidant. There's a rare phenomenon called cryptic pregnancy or delayed pregnancy, where a fertilized egg implants but develops extremely slowly, sometimes dormant for years before normal development suddenly triggers. The medical literature contains documented cases following major life changes, extreme stress, or physical trauma. Eleanor's mind raced through recent months. Daniel's decline, her grief, the discoveries in the attic, William's threats. Any or all could have created the physiological conditions for this medical anomaly. Grace continued with gentle professionalism. Most documented cases involve women who had previous fertility issues. The prevailing theory suggests the embryo was present, but developed so slowly it wasn't detectable by standard tests. When something triggers normal development, often significant hormonal shifts following loss or a trauma, pregnancy becomes clinically apparent. Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen, where apparently new life had been secretly growing even as she mourned Daniel's passing. The timeline would place conception during their final intimate moments before his illness rendered such connections impossible. Approximately 10 months ago, when they had shared a weekend away for their anniversary, a brief respite during which Daniel had seemed temporarily free from the pain he had hidden from her. Dr. Westfield specializes in high-risk obstetrics. Grace's voice broke through Eleanor's stunned reflection. She wants to discuss options, given the significant risks of pregnancy at your age. The tests show normal development so far, but there are many considerations to evaluate. Options, considerations, risks. The clinical terminology washed over Eleanor as a more profound realization formed in her consciousness. Daniel's dollhouse nursery, built over decades of disappointment, waiting patiently in the attic through years when hope had been abandoned. The miniature crib and tiny clothes, preserved with loving care for a child that conventional wisdom insisted would never come. Something Sophie had said echoed in Eleanor's memory, a house inside a house, like a secret heart beating inside a bigger heart. The poetic description now seemed prophetic rather than merely imaginative, the dollhouse nursery existing as physical manifestation of the life that had apparently been growing, impossibly slowly within her own body. The logical impossibility collided with the medical certainty of blood tests and hormone panels. Eleanor closed her eyes, Daniel's voice seemingly present in her memory. The most precious treasures take unexpected forms. When she had read those words hours earlier in the miniature chest, she had assumed they referred to Sophie, the child they might have adopted together. Now their meaning expanded to encompass an even more unexpected miracle. Dr. Sarah Chen, the fertility specialist who had guided their unsuccessful treatments decades earlier, arrived an hour later, summoned by Grace out of professional courtesy and personal connection. Her astonishment matched Eleanor's own as she reviewed the test results. In 30 years of reproductive medicine, I've seen perhaps 3 cases like yours. Dr. Chen's familiar, direct manner was tempered with wonder. A viable pregnancy at 52 would be remarkable under any circumstances, but following your documented history of premature ovarian failure. She shook her head in professional amazement. Science can't fully explain this. Some would call it a medical anomaly. Others might use different terminology, a miracle. The word formed in Eleanor's mind unbidden. Dr. Chen didn't dispute the characterization. What I can tell you objectively is that the embryo appears to have been present for years, developing at a fraction of normal speed until something, likely the significant hormonal shifts following Daniel's death, triggered normal developmental progression. The fetus currently shows normal growth patterns for approximately 10 weeks gestation. The scientific explanation provided structure, but no true clarity for the inexplicable. Eleanor struggled to reconcile the medical reality with 20 years of accepted impossibility. Daniel's final letter now carried prophetic weight. What you find there will change everything. Dr. Chen outlined the substantial risks of pregnancy at Eleanor's age: hypertensive disorders, gestational diabetes, chromosomal abnormalities, physical strain on a body not designed to bear children in its sixth decade. Each potential complication was presented with clinical precision, neither encouraging continuation nor recommending termination. I want this child. Eleanor's decision emerged with unexpected certainty, cutting through medical statistics and logical arguments. If it's possible, if there's any reasonable chance for a healthy outcome, I want to continue this pregnancy. Dr. Chen nodded, unsurprised by the determination in Eleanor's voice. She had witnessed the depth of the Sullivans' desire for children decades earlier. We'll monitor extremely carefully. Weekly appointments, specialized testing, possible hospitalization in later trimesters. Your age and medical history place you in the highest risk category, but your overall health is excellent, and you have no pre-existing conditions that would automatically contraindicate continuing the pregnancy. As Dr. Chen outlined the intensive medical regimen that would accompany this high-risk pregnancy, Eleanor's thoughts returned to the attic nursery, to Daniel's patient craftsmanship, creating a physical space for a dream neither of them had lived to see fulfilled. Until now, the universe Daniel had created in miniature, preserved through years of disappointment, protected from William's schemes revealed only after Daniel himself had passed beyond the reach of earthly joy or sorrow, had somehow manifested in flesh and blood reality. The child who would never come was coming after all, defying medical probability and statistical certainty. You'll need significant support. Dr. Chen's practical assessment interrupted Eleanor's philosophical musings. Family, friends, possibly home health assistants in later months. This won't be an easy journey. Eleanor thought of Robert's protective vigilance, Grace's medical expertise, Sophie's intuitive companionship. The network Daniel had assembled, not knowing the full purpose it would serve, stood ready to support this unexpected continuation of his legacy. I have people. Eleanor's hand remained protectively over her abdomen, where impossibility had taken root and flourished in secret. Daniel made sure of that, even though he never knew. The autumn leaves turned to winter frost in the weeks following Eleanor's hospital discharge. Her modest bedroom had been transformed into a medical monitoring station, with Grace supervising weekly home visits from Dr. Westfield's obstetric team. The impossible pregnancy progressed with cautious stability, each milestone a quiet victory against statistical improbability. Eleanor adapted to the restrictions of high-risk pregnancy with the same methodical determination that had characterized her response to widowhood. Daily walks along the riverfront property became her meditation, her body changing subtly as the miracle within continued to defy medical precedent. During these solitary journeys, she often felt Daniel's presence most strongly, as though he walked beside her, witnessing the unfolding of his final legacy. Robert Miller had appointed himself security chief for what he called Operation Sullivan Legacy, installing motion sensors and cameras throughout the property. William had maintained strategic distance since Eleanor's fall, but his legal maneuvers continued unabated. The postponed competency hearing had been rescheduled, now with the additional complication of Eleanor's pregnancy, which William's legal team characterized as further evidence of delusional thinking, given her age and medical history. The town had become subtly divided between those who viewed Eleanor's situation with sympathy and those who found the unlikely pregnancy fodder for speculation and gossip. Maxwell Reynolds publicly expressed deep concern for Eleanor's psychological well-being, while privately accelerating foreclosure paperwork despite the existence of Daniel's loan modification agreement. Sarah Livingston, the attorney Daniel had recommended, proved worth every penny of her considerable fees. She methodically assembled evidence of William and Maxwell's coordinated fraud attempt, building a counteroffensive designed not merely to defend Eleanor, but to expose the broader development scheme threatening the riverfront neighborhood. The dollhouse had become both sanctuary and symbol for Eleanor. Each evening she spent time in the attic, sometimes alone, sometimes with Sophie, adding small elements to the miniature home. Tiny books, miniature paintings, diminutive houseplants, as though preparing the model home alongside her actual one. The parallel act of creation connected her to Daniel's years of patient craftsmanship, each tiny addition a testament to anticipated joy. Sophie visited daily after school, her presence transforming from neighborly kindness to essential support. The child approached Eleanor's pregnancy with practical curiosity, researching fetal development in the school library and reporting findings with clinical precision. Her methodical nature, so like Daniel's, provided structure during moments when the situation's enormity threatened to overwhelm. Grace's medical expertise proved invaluable as the pregnancy progressed into its second trimester. The progressive revelation that Daniel had orchestrated these connections, introducing Grace to Sophie, ensuring they moved next door, creating a support network to sustain Eleanor after his passing, revealed the extraordinary foresight with which he had approached his final months. December brought an unexpected legal victory when Judge Harriet Winters denied Williams' petition for emergency conservatorship, citing Dr. Everett's report that described Eleanor as oriented and rational despite significant life stressors. The judge ordered a 3-month continuance, requiring William to present substantive evidence beyond family concerns before the court would reconsider competency questions. The temporary reprieve allowed Eleanor to focus on Christmas, Sophie's first in the Sullivan household. Together they decorated the tree with ornaments Daniel had carved over decades, each wooden figurine telling part of their shared history. For Sophie's gift, Eleanor commissioned Robert to complete the miniature rocking horse Daniel had left unfinished, the project becoming healing ritual for both the aging veteran and the child learning his friend's techniques. January arrived with twin challenges: increasingly severe winter weather and the scheduled town council meeting where Williams' development company planned to present rezoning proposals for the riverfront district. The bitter cold strained the Sullivan home's aging heating system, forcing Eleanor to relocate temporarily to Grace's more modern rental while emergency repairs were completed. This displacement proved fortuitous when a frozen pipe burst in the attic, sending water cascading through the ceiling. Robert and a team of Daniel's former woodworking students arrived within hours, implementing protective measures that saved the dollhouse from destruction while working through the night to prevent structural damage to the main house. The incident emphasized the property's vulnerability and Eleanor's limited physical capacity to maintain it alone. Williams seized this narrative opportunity, circulating concerned comments about the dangers of an elderly woman with a high-risk pregnancy attempting to manage a historic home during harsh winter conditions. Eleanor weathered these challenges with quiet resilience, focused on the town council meeting that would determine not just her property's future, but that of the entire riverfront neighborhood. Sarah Livingston had prepared exhaustive documentation of the Sullivan property's historical significance, environmental reports challenging the proposed development's impact on the river ecosystem, and evidence of procedural irregularities in the preliminary approval process. What Sarah couldn't include in the official presentation was the damning evidence of Williams' fraudulent activities, the recordings and documentation Eleanor had been saving for the perfect strategic moment. That evidence would transform a routine zoning dispute into potential criminal charges, but timing was critical. Premature accusations without proper groundwork could backfire, painting Eleanor as vindictive rather than victimized. The evening of the town council meeting arrived with apocalyptic weather, freezing rain encasing Millfield in treacherous ice that transformed familiar streets into hazardous obstacle courses. Eleanor insisted on attending, despite Grace and Robert's concerns about her safety in her advancing pregnancy. Some battles required physical presence, and this confrontation with William demanded nothing less than direct engagement. The Millfield Town Hall's Victorian architecture usually projected dignified stability, but tonight the ice-shrouded building loomed like a crystalline fortress, its windows glowing amber against the frozen landscape. Inside, the meeting room overflowed with concerned citizens, the controversy surrounding the riverfront development having mobilized unprecedented community attendance despite the dangerous weather. Eleanor entered supported by Robert on one side and Sophie on the other, her pregnant figure drawing surprised murmurs from those who hadn't witnessed her transformation firsthand. William sat at the developer's table near the front, his momentary shock at her appearance quickly masked by professional composure. Maxwell Reynolds occupied a seat near the council members, his banking position affording him unofficial advisory status on financial matters. Mayor Jenkins called the meeting to order with practiced formality, outlining the evening's agenda. Standard town business followed by William Sullivan's development proposal, with time allotted for community input before council deliberation. Eleanor and Sarah Livingston had strategically requested the final community comment position, allowing them to respond to all preceding arguments. William's presentation unfolded with polished precision, architectural renderings of luxury condominiums with riverfront views, economic projections promising increased tax revenue, assurances of minimal environmental impact, and emotional appeals to Millfield's future prosperity. His voice carried the confident resonance of someone who had navigated similar approval processes in multiple municipalities, each persuasive point calibrated for maximum effect on specific council members. Throughout William's presentation, Eleanor maintained neutral expression, one hand resting protectively over her rounded abdomen, the other clutching a leather portfolio containing Daniel's evidence. The council members' reactions ranged from enthusiastic nodding to skeptical note-taking, with only Councilwoman Diaz openly challenging William's dismissal of environmental concerns. When community input began, a parade of residents expressed familiar positions, business owners anticipating economic benefits, environmental advocates warning of watershed damage, historic preservationists lamenting potential loss of neighborhood character. The discussion grew increasingly heated as speakers traded accusations of either blocking progress or sacrificing heritage for profit. Finally, Mayor Jenkins called Eleanor's name. The room quieted as she made her deliberate way to the podium, her pregnant figure commanding an instinctive respect that transcended political divisions. She placed Daniel's portfolio on the lectern, then surveyed the council members with steady gaze. "I'm not here to discuss abstract concepts of development versus preservation." Eleanor's voice carried clearly through the chamber. "I'm here to present evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and violation of banking regulations specifically designed to manipulate this rezoning process." William half rose from his chair, protest forming on his lips, but Eleanor continued without acknowledgement. She methodically outlined the documented history of her property's mortgage status, displaying the notarized loan modification agreement Daniel had secured before his death, the same agreement Maxwell Reynolds had subsequently denied existing. From a neighboring seat, Sarah Livingston distributed copies of bank documents showing the modification properly recorded in bank systems, then mysteriously deleted following Daniel's death. The council members leaned forward, professional interest overtaken by genuine concern as the presentation shifted from typical zoning disputes to potential criminal activity. Eleanor detailed William's systematic pressure campaign following Daniel's death, the manufactured foreclosure threat, the attempted competency challenge, the physical intrusion during the power outage. As evidence mounted, Maxwell Reynolds edged toward the exit, only to find Millfield's police chief casually blocking his path, having been briefed on the situation earlier that day. The culminating moment arrived when Sarah Livingston played selected audio recordings of William and Maxwell discussing their strategy, their explicit acknowledgement of the legal loan modification they intended to lose, their timeline for forcing Eleanor to sell after Daniel's death, and their coordination with council members who had received undisclosed financial benefits from previous developments. Council President Whitaker's face flushed crimson as his name emerged in the recordings, his connection to William's previous projects characterized in terms that suggested kickbacks rather than legitimate business relationships. Mayor Jenkins called for order as the chamber erupted in shocked conversations and accusations. William's composed facade crumbled entirely. He surged toward Eleanor at the podium, face contorted with rage. 20 years I've waited for that property." His voice cracked with unveiled desperation. "Danny was supposed to sell years ago before the riverfront became valuable. Then he got sentimental about that stupid house, about you, about some orphan kid, always choosing emotion over sense." The chamber fell silent as William's unfiltered fury provided more damning testimony than any recording. Eleanor maintained her position, one hand instinctively protective over her unborn child, her voice steady despite the physical threat of William's advance. Daniel chose to build rather than destroy. He chose creation over exploitation, family over fortune, love over money. His final act was ensuring you couldn't take what he valued most. Not our home, not his legacy, and certainly not his dignity. Robert moved with surprising speed for his age, positioning himself between Eleanor and William. The police chief approached from behind, hand on his holster, though not drawn. William registered his suddenly precarious position, darting glances between the exit doors and the council members' horrified expressions. The carefully constructed public persona he had maintained for decades had shattered beyond repair, revealing the ruthless opportunist beneath. Mayor Jenkins officially suspended the rezoning proposal pending investigation, directing the police chief to secure all presented evidence. Maxwell Reynolds found himself escorted to the station for questioning. His banking career effectively ended regardless of eventual criminal outcomes. William remained technically free but thoroughly disgraced, his development company's reputation unsalvageable in Millfield or surrounding communities. Eleanor watched this collapse of her brother-in-law's schemes with complex emotion. Satisfaction at justice served tempered by sadness that Daniel's only brother had proven so fundamentally opposed to everything Daniel valued. As the meeting dissolved into informal clusters of stunned conversation, she felt the first sharp contraction across her abdomen, a warning signal from a body under extreme stress. Grace, monitoring Eleanor throughout the confrontation, recognized the signs immediately. Medical attention, now. Her professional assessment brooked no argument as she and Robert escorted Eleanor through the still chaotic chamber toward the exit. The freezing rain had intensified, transforming the town hall steps into a treacherous slope that challenged even careful navigation. Eleanor moved with deliberate caution, acutely aware of the precious life she carried. 3 steps from the bottom, her foot encountered invisible black ice. Time slowed as her balance failed, Robert's reaching hand missing her coat sleeve by inches. The impact never came. Instead, Eleanor found herself supported by unexpected arms. William, who had followed them outside, had instinctively lunged forward to prevent her fall. For one suspended moment, the Sullivan siblings-in-law stared at each other in mutual shock. Decades of animosity momentarily displaced by the basic human reflex to prevent harm. Eleanor regained her footing, strangely moved by this glimpse of the man Daniel had grown up with, before ambition hardened him beyond recognition. "Thank you." The simple acknowledgement seemed to disorient William more than any accusation, cracking his defensive anger to reveal momentary confusion. The strange moment ended when another contraction, sharper than the first, doubled Eleanor forward. Grace's urgent commands mobilized Robert to bring the car, while William stood frozen, witnessing the potential emergency his actions had partly precipitated. As they departed for the hospital, Eleanor caught a final glimpse of William through the car window, a solitary figure standing in freezing rain, watching the family connection he had systematically destroyed drive away into the winter night. Millfield General's emergency department received Eleanor with practiced efficiency, the staff familiar with her high-risk pregnancy status through Grace's professional network. Westfield arrived within 20 minutes, her preliminary examination confirming premature labor at 27 weeks, far too early for optimal outcomes given Eleanor's advanced age and the pregnancy's already precarious nature. The medical team administered medication to delay delivery while preparing for worst-case scenarios. Eleanor remained conscious but disoriented through multiple examinations, the hospital room's fluorescent harshness a surreal backdrop to the battle for her child's survival. Grace maintained professional calm while coordinating with colleagues, but Robert paced the corridor with military precision, counting steps as though mapping enemy territory. Sophie waited in the family lounge under a volunteer's supervision, methodically constructing paper cranes with hospital brochures, a skill Daniel had taught her during long treatment days. When Robert checked on her between pacing circuits, she presented him with a precisely folded bird. "Japanese tradition says 1,000 cranes grants a wish. We need 14 more for Eleanor and the baby." The labor-suppressing medication stabilized contractions temporarily, but Eleanor's blood pressure continued rising to dangerous levels, forcing medical compromise between maternal safety and fetal development. By midnight, Dr. Westfield determined they could delay no longer. The pregnancy had become life-threatening for both mother and child. The surgical suite transformed into Command Central as specialists assembled for the high-risk cesarean delivery. Eleanor drifted between consciousness and twilight sedation, the medication necessary to control her blood pressure, limiting her awareness. In this liminal state, she experienced Daniel's presence with startling clarity, not as memory or wishful thinking, but as tangible companionship, his hands seemingly clasping hers through the medical crisis. During one moment of lucidity, Eleanor focused on Dr. Palm Westfield's concerned face above her surgical mask. "Tell me the truth." Her voice emerged weaker than intended. "Will my baby survive?" The doctor's professional neutrality softened with compassion. "We're giving you both every possible advantage. The NICU team is standing by. In 27 weeks, while very early, is within the range of possible good outcomes." The question acknowledged both medical reality and human hope, the territory where science reaches its limits and other factors determine fate. The operation proceeded with methodical precision, each medical professional performing their role in the carefully choreographed emergency delivery. At 2:17 a.m., a tiny cry pierced the surgical suite's tense atmosphere, improbably strong for a premature infant weighing barely 2 pounds. The NICU team mobilized instantly, whisking the newborn into an incubator for immediate stabilization, while the surgical team focused on Eleanor's concerning blood loss. Robert waited outside the recovery room where Eleanor had been transported, his military bearing maintaining rigid control over emotional turmoil. When Grace emerged from checking on the infant in NICU, her expression provided the first encouraging news in hours. Small but mighty, the baby's responding well to initial interventions. Lungs more developed than expected for 27 weeks. Eleanor regained full consciousness in stages, gradually assembling the fragmented information provided by rotating medical staff. Her daughter, impossibly, miraculously, her daughter with Daniel, was alive but facing the significant challenges of extreme prematurity. Eleanor herself had survived a dangerous delivery complicated by postpartum hemorrhage that had required additional surgical intervention. The first photograph of her child arrived before Eleanor could physically visit the NICU, a Polaroid showing a tiny figure dwarfed by medical equipment, translucent skin revealing the miracle of functioning systems that had no business working so prematurely. Grace explained each tube and monitor with gentle precision, translating medical necessity into parental understanding. "She has Daniel's jawline." Eleanor traced the photographic outline with trembling finger, and his determination. During those critical first days, Sophie appointed herself communications director, traveling between hospital departments with handwritten updates and questions. Her methodical approach provided structure amid medical uncertainty, her connection to both Daniel's memory and Eleanor's present circumstance creating continuity when little else seemed stable. On the third day, Eleanor was wheeled into the NICU for her first direct contact with her daughter. The incubator created necessary separation, allowing only the careful insertion of Eleanor's hands through specialized ports to touch the impossibly delicate skin with sterile gloves. The tactile connection triggered profound emotional release, tears flowing freely as Eleanor experienced physical confirmation of the miracle Daniel had somehow anticipated. "I'm naming her Hope." The decision emerged with absolute certainty, for what Daniel built, what he believed in when everything logical said otherwise. The name, the same Daniel had written on his unfinished miniature rocking horse, completed a circuit of meaning that transcended coincidence. Eleanor felt its rightness in the deepest part of herself, the part that had maintained connection with Daniel beyond his physical absence. February unfolded in medical measurements, daily weight checks measured in grams, oxygen saturation percentages, infection risk assessments, and incremental feeding increases. Eleanor established residence in the parents' room adjacent to the NICU, her own recovery secondary to maintaining constant proximity to Hope's incubator. Robert transformed the Sullivan home during Eleanor's hospital confinement, coordinating repairs and accessibility modifications to prepare for their eventual return. The attic workshop received special attention, with environmental controls installed to maintain optimal temperature and humidity for both the dollhouse and future infant visits. William made no further appearances following the town council confrontation, though news filtered through Millfield's efficient gossip network. His development company had dissolved amid financial irregularities, Maxwell Reynolds faced banking regulation violations, and 3 council members had resigned citing personal reasons following law enforcement interviews. By mid-March, Hope had achieved sufficient stability to attempt kangaroo care, direct skin-to-skin contact outside the incubator. Eleanor sat motionless for 2 hours, her daughter secured against her chest beneath a warming blanket, every breath and tiny movement imprinting itself on her consciousness as a sensual miracle. That afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at the NICU, Sarah Livingston, carrying legal documents rather than the typical flowers or stuffed animals. The attorney's expression combined professional satisfaction with genuine pleasure as she presented the outcome of her behind-the-scenes work during Eleanor's medical crisis. The foreclosure proceedings have been permanently dismissed. Maxwell Reynolds has provided a signed affidavit acknowledging the validity of Daniel's loan modification agreement. Her efficient summary continued with mounting impact. Additionally, William has relinquished all potential claims to Daniel's estate and signed a non-interference agreement regarding both property and personal matters. The document includes significant financial penalties for any violation. Eleanor absorbed this information while maintaining perfect stillness, unwilling to disturb the precious contact with hope against her chest. The legal victory seemed almost secondary now, though its importance for their future security remained significant. The true victory lay in the warm weight of improbable life breathing against her skin. April brought sufficient medical progress for Hope's discharge, still tiny but remarkably resilient, having overcome the most dangerous complications of prematurity. Eleanor brought her daughter home to the Sullivan house on a perfect spring morning, the dogwoods blooming along the driveway Daniel had built by hand decades earlier. Sophie waited on the porch, her serious demeanor momentarily abandoned for uncharacteristic bouncing excitement. Grace stood nearby, her professional assessment satisfying medical concerns, while her personal investment showed in the nursery preparations visible through the front window. Robert maintained sentinel position by the garden gate, hands clasped behind his back in parade rest, eyes suspiciously moist beneath bushy eyebrows. The homecoming procession moved with ceremonial slowness, Eleanor carrying Hope in a carefully padded carrier, Grace monitoring both mother and infant with clinical attention, Robert scanning for potential hazards with protective vigilance, and Sophie darting ahead to ensure doors remained open and paths clear. Inside, the Sullivan home had transformed in Eleanor's absence. The front parlor now contained a hospital-grade bassinet positioned to catch morning light through eastern windows. The kitchen had been modified with accessible storage and ergonomic considerations for one-handed food preparation while holding an infant. The staircase featured a newly installed chairlift to accommodate Eleanor's ongoing recovery limitations. Most significantly, the attic had been reimagined as a combined nursery and workshop, the dollhouse remaining central, but now surrounded by a functional infant space with rocking chair, changing table, and a small crib positioned precisely where Daniel had placed its miniature counterpart in his model home. Eleanor settled into the rocking chair, Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms, while Sophie provided guided tours of the modifications she had helped design. The child's excitement paused momentarily as she retrieved something from beside the dollhouse. The miniature rocking horse Daniel had left unfinished, now completed with master craftsmanship that honored his original vision. Robert made this for Hope. Sophie placed the tiny wooden treasure in Eleanor's free hand. He followed all of Daniel's notes and used the same maple wood. It's exactly how Daniel wanted it. The completed horse represented perfect continuity. Daniel's design, Robert's execution, Sophie's understanding of its significance, all culminating in the tangible presence of the child for whom it had been intended across decades of patient hope. Eleanor placed it carefully inside the dollhouse nursery, the miniature finding its purpose in the real-world fulfillment of its symbolic promise. That evening, after medical checks and feeding routines established their new normal, Eleanor brought Hope to the attic for their first quiet moment, alone together. The space that had preserved Daniel's dreams now cradled their manifestation. Impossibility made flesh through forces beyond logical explanation. Eleanor positioned Hope's carrier beside the dollhouse, allowing the infant's unfocused gaze to fall upon the miniature world her father had created before knowing she would exist. The parallel between model and reality, between hope preserved in craftsmanship and hope embodied in new life, created completion of a circle begun decades earlier when Daniel had first channeled disappointment into creation. "Look at what your father built for you." Eleanor's whisper filled the attic's gentle silence. A house inside a house, a heart within a heart, a dream that refused to die. Outside, spring twilight settled over the Sullivan property, illuminating the river beyond with golden reflection. Within the attic sanctuary, 3 generations formed a new constellation: Daniel's craftsmanship, Eleanor's perseverance, and Hope's improbable existence, creating perfect triangulation across time and impossibility.